Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Tormone. I'm the Associate Executive Director of Alumni Engagement and Outreach here at the University of Maryland Alumni Association. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Amelia Aria, who is currently the Director of the Center on Young Adult Health and Development at the University of Maryland School of Public Health and an Associate Professor with the Department of Behavioral and Community Health. Currently, she is the principal investigator on the College Life Study, a study of health risk behaviors among college students. Her primary research focus has been to understand familial, social, and individual risk and resiliency factors associated with mental health and substance abuse among adolescents and young adults. She is currently involved in several efforts to translate research findings for practical purposes by parents and policymakers, including her leadership role in the Maryland Collaborative to Reduce College Drinking and Related Problems, an initiative that brings together Maryland colleges to address the problem of excessive alcohol consumption and its consequences on the campuses and in their communities. She has authored more than 140 scientific peer-reviewed publications and is the recipient of numerous grant awards from foundations and state and federal agencies. Dr. Aria received her BS in Human Development from Cornell University and her PhD in Epidemiology from the University of Pittsburgh School of Public Health and completed postdoctoral training at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. With that introduction, please welcome Dr. Amelia Aria.
Well, thanks, Tim, for that kind introduction, and I'm really looking forward to presenting this information to the parents who are listening. This is an important and sometimes difficult topic for parents, and as researchers, we're always in the position of making sure that our research findings have practical value to the lay community and parents. And this is an area that is of particular interest to the community because of the widespread consequences that alcohol poses for college students. So today I'm going to take you through this outline. We're going to talk a little bit about excessive drinking. I won't bore you with a lot of statistics, but I want to sort of set the stage and give you some idea of the types of problems that are caused by excessive drinking among college students. Then we'll talk a little bit about parenting, which if most of the attendees are parents, they know, just like I do as a parent of two grown kids, how difficult it is and how you always feel like what you learn may help someone else because you learn it too late. I'm always in the position where I can tell other parents the mistakes that I made. And so what I'm here tonight to tell you is what the science tells us about parenting a grown son or daughter, and also how you can communicate with that grown son or daughter a little bit more effectively, hopefully. I also want to just give you some idea about our efforts to help parents in the state of Maryland, just to sort of frame where this work is coming from, and to let you know about the Maryland Collaborative. Then specifically we'll talk about general communication tips. Some things may be common sense, but it's nice to have sort of a sense of things that you can do in general, no matter what the topic is that you're addressing with your grown son or daughter, how you can communicate more effectively with them. Then we'll talk about specific high-risk situations around alcohol and how you can actually start those conversations. So the idea here is to give you the actual words to use to have those conversations, which is unusual, by the way. It's one of the reasons why we started this work, and we'll get into this later, is because we found that that's what parents wanted, they needed, and there's very few resources out there for this age group. And we'll end with a request to all of the attendees to give us feedback on things that you might want to have more information on later. Please contact us and we'll give you some contact information. And then we'll go into questions and answers. I should say that Tim wanted to keep this pretty informal, so if you have a question, please ask the question during the session. So this gives you an idea of some recent data on how Marylanders see the problem of excessive drinking among college students. And this is important because a lot of people believe that college drinking is normative, it's what kids are going to do, it's not really that big of a deal, they grow out of it. But this tells you that almost 3/4 of our Maryland citizens see this to be a serious problem, either a very serious problem or a serious problem. And that's quite interesting because these include parents of college students as well as non-parents. And this illustrates that college drinking affects communities and other people sometimes as much as it affects the individuals and families that are more directly affected by it. So it sort of has this nasty habit of having radiating consequences into the community. In 2014, we conducted a large survey of Maryland college students, and 4,000 students responded to this survey. And this is their self-reported picture of how much and how often they drink. And often you'll hear the term binge drinking in the media and in other places. And binge drinking is a term, I'm not very fond of it, but we're sort of stuck with it. And binge drinking is for females 4 or more drinks in a row or within a couple of hours during the past month. And for males, it's 5 or more drinks in a row. And that only addresses quantity of drinking. That's just how many drinks you have. But what we were interested in is also how often you binge drink. So we divided this group of students who responded to the survey into 4 categories. The first was low-risk students who didn't drink during the past year or ever in their lifetime, and that comprised 20% of Maryland college students. Then you have your moderate risk category where they drank during the past year, but they didn't engage in any kind of binge drinking during the past month. And then you have 2 binge drinking categories. So one was high risk. They binge drank 1 to 4 times during the past month, so at least maybe once in a weekend. And then you have the very high risk category, which is about 20% of the sample, drinking 5 or more times during the past month in a binge drinking way. And we're concerned about the binge drinkers and the frequent binge drinkers because it comprises a large portion of the population, and this our efforts are sort of directed toward how can we reduce this problem. And just to give you some more information about the consequences for those students who drank during the past year. So this isn't even binge drinkers. This is just people who drank during the past year. How many of them had a hangover, blacked out, had academic consequences, were engaged in drunk driving or riding in a car with someone who had been drinking. And it's not surprising to researchers, but sometimes it's surprising to parents and others how often drinkers black out. And I went to schools, almost, 30 years ago, and back then we didn't drink to black out. But now we're seeing that almost 1/3 of college students who drink blacked out in the past year, which is pretty serious. And the top 3 consequences, hangovers, blacking out, and academic performance problems, all have something in common, and that is that they are a result of cognitive dysfunction. So it has something to do with a change in the way the brain is processing information, and that's a problem. Other consequences are very serious, like having unprotected sex or getting taken advantage of sexually. Physical injury is often one of the consequences of excessive drinking. And as you can see, getting in trouble is not a high prevalent consequence. And that's an issue because we're really trying to encourage colleges to enforce the rules that they have on the books so that not that we want to we want to kick kids out because of this, but we want to use enforcement as an opportunity to get them back on the right track, because the reason why they're in college is to fulfill their potential, and sometimes enforcing a rule about excessive drinking can help mitigate consequences later. On a national level, we know that college drinking is responsible for a minimum of 1,800 deaths a year, 600,000 unintentional injuries, and the list goes on. Drinking and driving is quite a problem among college students in particular, and there's been a lot of media concern more recently among college students in terms of the relationship with sexual assault and date rape. So what are the drivers of this problem? To put this in context, there are a lot of things that are involved in excessive drinking, and what we're here to talk about today are these parent influences on alcohol and these consequences. So the research is very, very consistent in showing that the limits that parents set on drinking and the disapproval associated with drinking is protective against excessive drinking and related harms. And sometimes this is surprising to parents because they think that if they set limits on their child's drinking, it'll only boomerang and get worse. But what the research tells us over and over again is that limit setting is very, very protective. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but the extent to which parents can disapprove of drinking, set zero tolerance policies, the better off they will be. If anyone has questions about that, we can talk about that some more. So let's talk about parenting in general. Parents who are attending obviously know this pretty well. When you send your grown child off to college, it's a time to breathe a sigh of relief. They've made it through high school. They're finally in college. You're happy about it, but you're also really scared in some ways because the threats are high and serious. But also the opportunities are great. So college is really a time to have a grown son or daughter explore their interests, develop friendships that will be lifelong lasting, have experiences that help them nurture their career interests. And also, it is a great opportunity to develop the skills that will carry them into the future in terms of their ability to develop critical thinking skills and resourcefulness. And one of the main messages of our work at the Center on Young Adult Health and Development is that substance abuse gets in the way of these critical thinking skills, the ability to develop resourceful sort of abilities to access resources and to launch their career interests. It really sort of sucks the motivation out of students, and it can derail a student's path to success. It's also important to set the stage by telling you, and maybe some of you know this already, but the decision-making powers of the average 18 to 25-year-old are dictated in a large degree by their brain development. And what we have learned over the past 10 to 15 years is incredibly important from our neuroscientists and for our neuroscientist colleagues. And what we have found is, and to simplify this for this webinar, the frontal areas of the brain, those are the parts of the brain that control rational decision making. Those are the planning and regulatory centers of the brain. Those are the slowest to develop. The emotional centers of the brain, however, develop first. They develop earlier, and that means that emotions are often driving the decision-making of adolescents and young adults. So those of you with kids know that that is true. They sort of will go on emotion rather than their logical decision-making, and that stems back from how the brain is developing on average across the years. So We often say, in kind of a joking way, but it is true, that parents, you are their frontal lobe. So your job is to play the role of that CEO of their brain, where you can help them plan and regulate their behavior and have more of a future sense rather than an emotionally driven, impulsive decision making. I told you before that the parental disapproval is incredibly important in protecting against excessive drinking, and this is data actually from the Maryland Collaborative, from Maryland students. And what you see is the categories at the bottom reflect those categories that we talked about before. And you can see that 83% of those low-risk students, those who abstained during the last year or have never had a drink of alcohol in their life, had parents who did not permit any alcohol consumption during high school. In contrast to the very high-risk category, only 38% of those students had parents that didn't permit any alcohol consumption during high school. So the bottom line here is that there is no reason or evidence to suggest that if you set zero tolerance policies, your children will explode when they go to college. It's something that we hear over and over again, that parents really believe that if they feel like they can teach their child or practice while they're in high school, they won't have problems later. Nothing could be farther from the truth, according to the science. The more practice in high school, the more problems later. The earlier the age of first drink, the more problems later. So the more you can delay the first drink or the age of intoxication, the less likely you are to have problems later. So that is a main message, that zero tolerance is actually very protective. Guidance among just providing guidance is really key, because you are not underestimating the threats. I deal with a lot of parents who have had very tragic consequences happen, and the one thing that everyone who has had that horrible experience has told me is that they wish they had intervened earlier, and that they wish that they had trusted their instincts. So there's nothing to prevent you from acting if you feel like something might not be right. It's always better to intervene early. But it's also important to make sure that you're not preachy, to realize that communication at this age is a two-way street. You have to develop the art of asking open-ended questions rather than yes-no questions, and making sure that you're always respectful and clear, and just like you would be with anyone that you would want to talk to. You have to have very serious and calm conversations when things are not going badly. It's always good to have conversations when things aren't going badly, rather than just wait until things get a little crazy to have conversations. It's also important to facilitate getting help when it's appropriate. But you can also make sure that your grown child self-advocates and finds their own resources to solve problems. Our efforts to help parents started in 2012. It was the state who funded the Maryland Collaborative to reduce college drinking and related problems. And one of the ideas here is to work with colleges across the state to sort of harmonize the policies and practices that they have on their campuses with what we know from the science. And this is not an easy problem to solve. It's a long-range strategy that we have. And we really believe that it's going to take efforts at all the different levels to start to reduce excessive drinking in Maryland. And part of the solution is involving parents. We started by having focus groups with parents and asking them what they wanted. They wanted to know how to have these meaningful conversations. They wanted to know what was going on in the lives of their students, what was happening on campus. They also told us that they were very concerned about things that could go wrong, but they didn't need more information. They needed to know how to have these conversations. And we stress to them that your child is actually the best resource for the information gathering that you have. There's no way that we could put up a website and tell you what's going on at College Park or at Frostburg. Or it's really learning the art of asking your child about what is going on. They're going to be the ones who can tell you about new trends, their involvement with alcohol. And so what we did was we developed a website called collegeparentsmatter.org, and to give parents the tools and the scripts, the actual scripts to improve communication. So this is a screenshot from the website, and we're going to go through, for the remainder of this webinar, some pieces of this, but I encourage you all to go look at the website yourself and to send it to your friends. It's a free resource. And we divided it into, we focused the website squarely on communication with your college-age student. And we wanted to use high-risk drinking situations as illustrative topics to have conversations, but we also wanted to give parents some general tips for communication. So tonight we're going to go through first the tips for general communication, and then we're going to go through 3 of the high-risk situations. So tip number 1, don't be afraid to start this conversation. It doesn't have to be taboo. Like I said, it's much better to talk about it when things are calm and when nothing is going on. That's the best time to have a conversation. You can assume that your child has had experience with high-risk drinking situations. You don't have to assume that they were directly involved, but you can use a news article to bring up the topic. You can simply ask about opportunities. You can ask about things that they've heard or seen, but definitely this is not a taboo topic. Number 2, you are, as a parent, allowed to disapprove of drinking. If you are one of those parents who have always sort of secretly disapproved and have had a lot of parents around you say you're being naive, you can banish the fear that you're being naive about this. You can rely on the scientific evidence that zero tolerance and disapproval is protective. It's where you should be. If you didn't do that in high school, don't feel like all is lost. You don't necessarily have to backpedal as much as you can just increase the level of conversation as your child moves through college. But definitely permissive attitudes about drinking is associated with more problems later. It's not, a lot of people say, well, if I'm my child's best friend, won't that be protective? And actually the research shows that setting limits is a lot more important around this particular issue than being their friend. That doesn't mean necessarily that you have to have a conflictual relationship in order to be protective. Conflict is not good, but being clear and being disapproving is something different than being conflictual. So it's not a good idea just to rely on the fact that you're your child's best friend. It's not necessarily going to hurt or help in terms of substance use. So I said this before, to banish the fear that your disapproval is naive. I think you're getting the idea that there's a lot of parents out there who feel this way. They want to disapprove, but their peer group, the other parents are, it's almost like peer pressure among parents that there's this myth going around where you really should let your kids drink in a safe environment, and that will protect them somehow from high-risk drinking elsewhere. And like I said, there's nothing in the research literature to suggest that that is true. It is much more important to disapprove. And it's also, you might be naive to suspect that they'll not ever drink or ever drink too much, but your continual messaging on this issue is going to be important. This is tip number 4, is sort of known as the pick your battles principle, and we develop these tips with the help of clinicians who are very well aware of parent-child conflict and how parents respond to kids in more serious clinical situations. And one of the lessons from the clinicians was, if you feel as a parent that you're making some headway and the conversation is going well, it's not the time to remind your child to call their grandmother. So focus on one message. You can be proud of the fact that the conversation on that particular topic is beneficial, but you don't want to deter from that one message. It's always a good idea to have one conversation about one thing and then have another conversation at a different time about another thing. Number 5 is, you really don't have to worry that everyone is drinking in college. One of the things that we're trying to do is spread the word that that college drinking doesn't have to be normative. It doesn't have to be a rite of passage of young adulthood. If you can think back 20 years ago, and think about the success that we've had with smoking, we have denormalized smoking in public environments, and we don't even really think about it or notice it now. But it would be awfully strange if someone in the grocery store lit up a cigarette. And that was only 25 years ago that that might have happened. So we're trying to, over time, and it might seem like geological time, change the perception that college drinking has to be normative, or that drinking has to be part of the college experience. With all of the investment that parents have put into college and the emphasis on making sure that a college education has the value that it does, it's very, very important to realize that value, to maximize their potential. And like I said, drinking and other substance use just appears to get in the way of fulfilling those goals. It's a distraction, and that's how it should be discussed with kids. It's also important to just make communication a regular activity. I'm sure you do this anyway as parents, but sometimes it's good to schedule a time to talk. When my kids were growing up, we always had Sunday afternoons. We got in touch with each other. Now it's easier with texting to try to communicate with them a lot more frequently, but it's good to have that personal conversation, not just texting, but voice-to-voice conversations, especially about more serious issues like this. Lastly, recognize the power of your influence. We sent out a Christmas card a few years ago to our constituents, letting them know that about a data point that we had, where we asked our college students in our research study what the #1 positive influence was on their life, and #1 was parents. And actually the #1 negative influence on college students was partying too much and their friends. So it's not what you would think. So parents have a great amount of influence on the behavior of students, and so it's really important to recognize that power. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 situations that are on the website. Like I said, this is just a teaser to invite you to go to the website and really dive in a little bit more. So we're going to cover these sort of in a cursory way right now. And this is what the screenshot of the topics section looks like. And we're going to add to this over time. So hopefully over the next year we'll put more and more topics on, and we want your input on which topics to include. So the first topic that we encourage conversations about is this idea of 21st birthday. And research has shown that this is a very high-risk time for excessive drinking. 80% of college students report drinking alcohol while celebrating their 21st birthday. half of these birthday drinkers drink more than they ever had before. There are some trends to drink 21 shots or create shot books where they drink a shot with each of their friends and they sort of memorialize who they had a shot with. So all of these things are fairly dangerous, as you know. One of the things that we encourage saying is something like, do you have anything fun planned? Are you excited for your birthday? To enter into the conversation about what they might plan to do. You can say things like, I was very upset to read about the fact that some celebrate their birthday by drinking 21 drinks in a row. This is really dangerous. Obviously, it can lead to an alcohol overdose. And then remind them that if they are going to drink alcohol on their 21st birthday because they have reached legal age, make sure they slow down and they eat and drink things like water as well to keep hydrated. And don't say things like, you only turn 21 once, go crazy, or give them permission to engage in high-risk behavior. So Tim, I think you're going to ask a poll question.
I am, thank you. Your child's 21st birthday is coming up. What should you say to him or her? A, when I turned 21, I blacked out from drinking too much. That was very unsafe and I want you to be more responsible when you drink. B, have any of your friends had too much to drink on their 21st birthday or any other time? How'd that go for them? Or C, I know that you will be drinking heavily on your birthday, but that concerns me because that is dangerous and you could get seriously sick. Please vote now. And we'll wait about 20 seconds until most people have voted. Okay, with almost 90% of the votes in, we had 2% select A, 51% select B, and 47% select C.
Okay, so let's talk about why it's not C. We made these questions hard on purpose. So one of the things about C, I know that you'll be drinking heavily, but that concerns me because it's dangerous and you could get seriously sick, is saying, I know that you'll be drinking heavily on your birthday, but that concerns me, encourages drinking or as an expectation for their 21st birthday. So encouraging your child to be safe, but also assuming that they'll make irresponsible choices sometimes can be confusing. And so that doesn't support safe drinking behaviors. And the reason why B is a better choice to say something like, have any of your friends had too much to drink on their 21st birthday, is it is the art of asking that open-ended question. So it's not a rule, you're not giving them a suggestion, you're actually opening up a discussion, you're opening up a conversation. And that's what we always encourage, is trying to think of a way to ask a question about something. And asking about previous drinking experiences and talking about their friends is a great conversation starter, because they're much more likely to tell you stories about what they've experienced with their friends than they are to say something about themselves directly, but it can also get to a direct conversation about something that they're doing. Okay, the next topic is about housing and roommates, and living in a residence hall in the first year for a lot of first-year students is sometimes your child's first exposure to being independent and living on their own. There's a lot of transitions going on with trying to feel like they're independent and also trying to sort of prove to other people that they are worthy of their attention, or they're trying to make friends, they're trying to fit in. So this is a high-risk situation in a way, because alcohol is often a way to to form social relationships, and it's likely that alcohol will be encountered in their own residence hall or in someone else's residence hall. So even though there are a lot of policies around not drinking in residence halls, it's not like it doesn't happen. So this is a really important thing to discuss with your grown son or daughter. And one of the things we suggest is just something very general about what are the biggest problems you've had getting used to life in a residence hall. So that is an open-ended question that allows them to bring up the topic of people drinking in the residence halls or people doing other drugs even. Do people on your hall go out at night? Asking about activities, what do people like to do in your residence hall? And if your roommate's alcohol use is an issue, you need to let your roommate know. Often we find that students will be matched with someone who has a different drinking pattern than them or a different sleep pattern. And so it's really important to ask them questions about things that they're doing with their roommates that sort of opens up the conversation there. So Tim, do we have another question?
We sure do. Your child has been in the residence hall for 2 weeks and you are concerned that he or she has begun drinking there. How do you start the conversation? A, I know they are doing a movie night in your residence hall on Friday. I think it's good that you go for that, or go to it, sorry. B, there will be other students drinking and pre-gaming in the residence hall, but I do not want you to do that. There are rules in your residence hall and I do not want you to get in trouble with your RA. Or C, how often have you seen other people drinking alcohol in your residence hall? Go ahead and vote, please. And Dr. Aria, I have a question that's like 4 people have asked the same question. So once we're done with this poll, can I ask you that question?
Sure.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we have about 92% of the votes in. So 2% said A, 8% said B, and 90% said C.
Okay, great. So I think that C is definitely the answer. Like I said before, the best way to transition the conversation toward alcohol use is to ask about other people, other residents. So saying something like, how often have you seen other people drinking is a great conversation starter. It's really important. B kind of gives the idea that you're giving in to the belief that college is all about partying. And if you believe that it is, and your child might think you approve, and then your child might start to believe this as well and sort of portray alcohol drinking in college as an expectation, and that's something we're trying to get away with. And very few of you said A, and the reason why is it's not a good idea to dictate what your child needs to be doing in terms of the activities that the residence halls have to offer, like I want you to do this. It often doesn't come across well. I should also add that a lot of this, a lot of the script development and tips on the website was developed in consultation with college students. So we had the benefit of having their voice in this, and that was a very important component of this. So Tim, you said that there was a question that was being asked.
Yes, I had Jeff, Joe, Bonyi, and Alicia, and Chandra actually, so 5 people basically asked the same question. And it is, does the drinking habits of parents have any influence on their children, either positively or negatively? And is there any sort of science behind your answer, or is it just an observation?
That's a great question. And there's a lot of literature on this. There is a large body of literature to suggest that drinking is familial, and I hesitate to say, I use the word familial because familial means both genetic as well as environmental. So drinking heavily runs in families, and that is a result of alcohol. The way that alcohol affects people appears to be genetic. So sometimes when people drink a lot and they don't experience any negative consequences, they tend to drink more, and that seems to be a genetically driven effect of alcohol. So certainly that is something to watch out for. If your child says, wow, I don't experience any negative consequences, I can drink people under the table, I have a very high tolerance for alcohol. That's probably true in parents as well, but that is a sign that things are not, that things could be problematic. So high tolerance equals more risk for problems, and that appears to run in families. The other thing is that excessive drinking in parents tends to interfere with parenting skills, and so the lack of parental skills in monitoring their child's behaviors is associated with increased risk for drinking. So if a parent excessively drinks and that excessive drinking interferes with their parenting skills, poor parenting skills is a risk factor for excessive drinking in children. So it's not a genetic effect, but it's certainly related in that way. Now, what about good behaviors? We talked about excessive drinking behaviors in families, but what about good behaviors? Modeling responsible drinking in the home is not necessarily protective, but it certainly is the better way to model behaviors. Certainly never getting drunk around your child, and another thing that people don't realize that they do, even if they're not drinking excessively, is they're modeling the situations in which they drink around their kids. So if you come home, for instance, and say, oh my gosh, I've had such a hard day, I need a drink. And maybe you'll only have one, but what you're modeling to your son or daughter is that alcohol is a way of numbing the stress of whatever you experience during the day. So drinking, if you are a parent who drinks, drinking very moderately in times of celebration, in times of just for during dinner, things like that, that's much more reasonable of a way to drink than drinking excessively or to numb emotions. The same goes with medication use, that you just want to model good medication use rather than take other people's medication. So they do listen, and that role modeling is very, very important. I hope I answered that as comprehensively as I can.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, or should we go on to the next one?
Let's go on to the next one.
Okay. So the last topic is impaired driving, and I showed you the statistics on how many students drink and drive when they're in college. So this is a real issue, and one of the problems is that they're not only at risk for accidents because of the alcohol, but they're at risk for accidents because they have relatively little driving experience. And when they are driving, especially if they are with their friends, they will engage in risky activities like not paying attention or texting while driving, and that just compounds the problems related to drinking. The other issue is that they really, a lot of students do not realize how drunk they are. So the whole know when to say when, it's very difficult for a drunk person to know that they are as drunk as they are, or it's difficult for them to judge their level of impairment. So that's very important. And again, another issue related to this is that riding with a person who has been drinking is very dangerous as well. So that's something to have a conversation about. This is a totally preventable issue. There is absolutely no reason to either drink and drive or ride with someone who has been drinking. Um, there's always a way around this. So some of the things that we encourage parents to say is ask them about how they usually get home after when they go out with their friends. Again, ask about worrying about their friends driving after drinking. How have you or would you talk to them about your concerns? Sort of putting it on them to be the responsible person about having the zero tolerance around drinking and driving. And then asking about campuses that have a safe ride program, but not necessarily, you're not necessarily condoning this, you're just opening it up for discussion. Because a lot of people are conflicted about whether or not campuses should have these safe ride programs. The data is still out, the jury's still out on whether or not they do prevent problems. It seems like a good idea, so I don't want to totally discredit them, but until we see real hard data on it, it's important to view it with a little bit of caution because it might seem like they're condoning going out and excessively drinking. Never say in an emergency it's okay to drink and drive. Okay, so we have another poll question.
Yes, we do. You are concerned about your child getting home safely after a night of drinking. What should you not say? A, do not get a DUI. DUIs can create a multitude of legal problems and ruin your plans for getting a job. B, I am concerned that you are getting in a car after you've been drinking. Your safety is important to me and we need to talk about this. Or C, I have driven after having one drink and I was fine. I would rather you do that than walk home by yourself. Please vote. And then Dr. Aria, I got like 3 questions that came in that are all kind of interesting I'd love to ask.
Okay.
Okay, we have about 88% of the votes in, and 5% said A, 53% said B, and 42% said C.
Okay. The answer is really C. You wouldn't want to say, I have driven after having one drink and I was fine. I'd rather you do that than walk home by yourself. This is a tough question, but I think that the answer A says, do not get a DUI. DUIs can create a multitude of legal problems and ruin your plans for getting a job. It's a good thing to say, to tell them about the legal consequences, but it's also something that you want to, it's not the only reason why they shouldn't be drinking and driving. So there's a little bit of a caveat there. It's really important to say that their safety is important to you. Your job as a parent is to keep them safe and healthy. And so if you have reason to believe that they're getting into a car after they've been drinking, that's an important thing to bring up.
Thank you. So I have a question from Bill. He writes, your research findings on college student drinking patterns are compelling, including the fact that over the past year, nearly half were high or very high risk drinkers. 1/3 blacked out, 1/4 lost ground in their schoolwork, and a large number had unprotected sex or were hurt or injured. The university has decided to sell beer at football games and basketball games starting this fall. What are your thoughts about this, the potential effect on student health and safety?
Well, my comments on this are public. I spoke about the research on this topic, which is that if you make alcohol more available, the chances are greater that people will drink. The university is putting in place a lot of restrictions, and I hope that they are able to evaluate the effect of that policy. But we presented the research data on that at the public hearing and basically told, presented the data that making alcohol more available is a risk factor for more excessive drinking.
Great. The next question is,
Was there another question, Tim?
Yeah, there is another question. Actually, there's two, and I'm going to try and condense this, but basically a couple of people have asked to kind of compare and contrast peer pressure influence versus parental influence, and how do you combat the peer pressure piece of things?
That's a really, really important question, and we're going to have another set of scripts and tools on the website about peer pressure, so look for that on the website. But just to summarize, one important thing is that even though parents believe that peers are more important than parental influence, peers are important for different reasons. And they're not necessarily going to listen to their friends over their parents. So in the years that we've been doing the college life study and listening to what students tell us, parents are really number one. So when it comes down to decision making, your voice, the parent's voice, will go off in their head more loudly than a friend. But peer pressure is very important in that they'll engage in risky behaviors around their friends, but you have to be aware of that. And another important aspect of this is peer selection. So one of the things that I always encourage parents to do is really get to know not only the friends, like know who their friends are, even in college, but try to, and maybe this is harder in college but easier in high school, is try to get to know the parents of the friends that they have. So understanding what kind of rules and monitoring and things that the parents of their peers have instituted is important. But what the research shows is that parent limit setting and parental monitoring of whereabouts and activities, just being vigilant, has an effect on peer selection. So if you're the type of parent who asks about where you are and encourages your child to let you know where they're going to be at a certain time or what they're doing on the weekend or something like that, they are more likely to choose lower risk peers. And lower risk peers obviously aren't going to have as negative of an influence as some what we call deviant peers. But having said all that, your children are going to have a wide variety of friends, and sometimes having risk-taking friends is enjoyable, and it's part of life to get to know different types of people. And what you can do there is make sure that you arm your son or daughter with the tools to help a risk-taking friend. So if you find out that one of their friends may have these issues, it's a good idea to not just say don't be their friend anymore, but to intervene and to say, I think you can talk about getting some help for that friend, or and talking about their friends as in the way that they'll be the leader of their peer group, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Was there another question, or?
Why don't you go ahead, and if
Okay.
we have time at the end, we'll ask a couple of other questions that have been asked.
Okay. So the last thing, really, to summarize, is we need your feedback on what you would like to know, more information. We would love to provide you with more information, and this is a screenshot of the contact page on the website. So it's collegeparentsmatter.org, and this is, we're not going to sell your email address or anything like that, but we need to hear from you. And this also helps us to let the state know that this is a valuable resource. This is available nationally for other people. We've gotten a lot of interest across the country, but we want this to be a resource for Maryland families. So send us your constructive criticism about the website, things that you want to hear, resources that you would like to see on the website, and we'll do our best to accommodate all of that. So I'm just going to show my contact information. You can send an email to me. You can visit the website for more information. Like I said, there's a lot more detail on the scripts and the tools about these high-risk situations on the website. So that's all I have for tonight.
Great. So we've got about 3 minutes, and I have 3 questions in queue, so let's see if we can get through them, 1 per minute.
Okay.
What type of help is there at the University of Maryland for students with an alcohol or drinking problem for parents that may not have the financial means to pay for a therapist?
Sure. There's the health center is where I would send a student. There's a woman named Laura Place. She's a counselor at the health center. I'm sure that she would be helpful in directing you to the resources. At this stage, it's a lot easier to deal with problems than later. So there are techniques that the clinical staff there is well versed on that might be of help, but the health center would be your best place to go.
Great. Elise asks, what is a Safe Ride program?
Okay, a Safe Ride program is where a college has decided to offer transportation to students that might be going off campus, legal age students who might be going off campus to drink, and so it provides them a safe way of getting home. Like I said, there's a little bit of controversy over whether or not that means that they're condoning excessive drinking.
Okay. Ginger asks, oops, sorry. How does the college convey to students the risk they are taking by serving underage students, and if there is a serious harm or death, they are vulnerable to legal charges, including homicide? Both parents and students seem uninformed about the legal issues surrounding excessive drinking and providing alcohol.
So is the question about what the campuses are doing?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so each campus is engaged, the Maryland Collaborative Colleges are engaged in conversations with us, and they have a lot of activities going on where they are trying their best to get those messages across. How to do that, there's always room for improvement, but if you're interested in finding out what your particular son or daughter's campus is doing, I would direct you to the Office of Student Affairs. Like the Vice President of Student Affairs is usually the person that can help you sort of describe what that campus is doing, because there's a variety of ways that campuses are engaged in that activity.
Okay. The last question we have for this evening is, will this be available for use? And so I will be sending out an email to everybody that's RSVP'd for this webinar, and included with that email will be a link to this presentation so that you can review it or look at it at your leisure. So with that being said, I want to thank Dr. Aria for spending time with us this evening, and I also want to thank the audience for spending time listening to this very important subject. If you have any questions regarding anything that Dr. Aria is doing, she has her email address at the end of her presentation. You may also email alumni@umd.edu to ask any questions regarding what the Alumni Association is doing. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, and go Terps.
Thanks.